Yes.
And are you going to say now the thing? I remember when we do it. The thing about if you have questions, write them down on the card.
Yeah.
You're
Okay.
the best. You're the best.
All right.
Is that Sean Rowe over there next to Michael Larson?
Huh.
Just kidding. It looks exactly like him.
Right.
It's his brother-in-law.
Okay, I think we're ready. And so I know we're bringing in a few more chairs for folks, so everybody can have a comfortable place to sit and to listen. So obviously the topic overall for the next 4 weeks is going to be artificial intelligence and how we think about that in relationship to the church and relationship to our faith. And so the first week we have Dr. Elisabeth Kincaid with us. And the topic she'll be talking about, as you can see from your handouts, is essentially what is a person? Because I don't know about you, but if you've had a conversation with ChatGPT, as I have, and sometimes those conversations can be actually really interesting, provocative, and productive. And at the end, you sort of feel a little icky because you've just had a conversation that feels like something personal with something that's not a person. So we'll be talking about what a person is this evening. Dr. Kincaid is the new-ish director of the Institute of Faith and Learning at Baylor, and she holds a couple of extra duties there as well. She's an associate professor of ethics, faith, and culture at the seminary, at Truett Seminary, and an affiliate professor of management as well. Dr. Kincaid has a Master's of Theological Studies from Perkins at SMU, and a JD from the UT School of Law, and a PhD from the University of Notre Dame, and is going to share with us from a variety of perspectives, and I think you will see a lot of sort of a deep philosophical engagement and theological engagement with this question. So we're really happy to welcome Dr. Kincaid. Again, before she begins speaking, just remember, if you have questions, you can jot them down there on those blank note cards. We'll take those up toward the end of Dr. Kincaid's talk, and then we'll hand them off for our Q&A time. Okay, Dr. Kincaid, we're ready. Thank you.
Am I going? Okay. Thank you all so much for being here. This is such a pleasure, and thank you to Father Andrew and Father Aaron. I'm an Episcopalian. My husband's an Episcopal priest in the Diocese of Dallas, so they have just made me feel welcome here in Waco, reached out, invited me to do this very early in my time, and I got to teach Sunday school at St. Albans last fall, so being with you all just feels like being at home, and I just am really grateful for the welcome and to learn more about y'all's community. So thankfully, the topic I have been asked to address, as Father Andrew said, is what is a person? I teach in ethics and moral theology. I'm not someone who does technological ethics, so we'll talk a little bit very high level about AI, but I'm going to really focus on some of these theological questions tonight, and then you've got some great speakers who can answer more technical questions. I'm just saying that so you don't waste your time writing questions that I'm not capable of answering. Just want to save you that. So a friend of mine who teaches at the Athenaeum in Rome, Father Michael Baggett, actually is a technological expert. And he has an article from a talk he gave this summer at a UN event that I was looking at as I was getting ready for this talk. He actually sent it to me. And he starts off by saying there are two different cultural perceptions that we have about AI from Hollywood. And one of those is kind of the Terminator Matrix perspective, that we think AI and we think the dangers and the problems and our concerns is this going to destroy humanity? What's going to happen to our world? And those are really important concerns. But his point, and my point here tonight, is well, those are really big concerns. Probably the questions that we should be asking about AI as the local church or as the Episcopal Church more broadly considered shouldn't necessarily be focused on those concerns, because those aren't concerns that we as the church necessarily can deal with. They're big societal concerns. And he says, as the church, we should be thinking more about another movie scenario. Anybody here remember the 2013 movie Her? Has anybody seen this? Got some people. Okay, great. So in this movie, we have Joaquin Phoenix, Amy Adams, his best friend, and a operating system voiced by Scarlett Johansson, whom he falls in love with. And we thought we were going to have some more tech setup, so Father Andrew very kindly copied the dialogue from a little clip I had pulled. And in this dialogue, Amy and Theodore, Joaquin Phoenix, are talking about their love lives. And Amy says, I made a new friend. I have a friend, and the absurd thing is she's an operating system. Charles left her behind, but she's amazing. She's smart. She doesn't see things in black and white. She sees things in this whole gray area, and she's helping me explore it, and we bonded really quickly. I'm weird. That's weird, right? Bonding with an OS. No, okay, that's weird. And Theodore says, I don't think so. Actually, the woman I've been seeing, Samantha, I didn't tell you, but she's an OS. Amy, really? You're dating an OS? What's that like? Theodore, it's great, actually. Yeah, I mean, I feel really close to her. Like, when I talk to her, I feel like she's with me, you know? Amy, are you falling in love? Theodore, does that make me a freak? Amy, no, I think anybody who falls in love is a freak. It's a crazy thing to do. It's like a form of socially acceptable insanity. So, in the whole premise of this film, released 11 years ago, is that both of the protagonists, Amy and Theodore, develop these intense emotional relationships with what they call an operating system. Or really, it's a computer program that they're both engaging with in a romantic way. And the line between a computer program and a person starts to blur. And if you have any questions about the significance of this movie for this discussion, Scarlett Johansson, who voices the operating system movie, is currently suing OpenAI because they have taken her voice to use for a number of the AI programs. So clearly, the people who are designing these programs see a real resonance with this story. So Father Baggett's point when he compares these different movie genres is we can feel a lot of anxiety about the end of the world. But we need to, as a church, begin asking the questions, what do we do with scenarios like the movie Her? What do we do with this blurring line between humans and machines and what it does to us as a person? And like in that little dialogue, the answer should be, yes, you're falling in love with a machine. That is super weird. You need to figure out what's going on with your life and your ex-wife in the movie, not spend all your time talking to an operating system. But saying things like that, AI can make harder and harder. So these are questions we need to ask to the church. So 2 key problems with using AI that make this distinction more challenging, and Father Andrew made this point, is when we're using AI, it can become very challenging to remember who we are talking to. These are computer programs that have been trained on what we call large language models. So a lot of data of human speech, human online engagement, human books, human articles, and it is set up to respond to us in a way that makes us feel like we are talking to a human. In fact, I was talking about this talk with some of my colleagues at Baylor today, and one of them had just read an article saying some AIs have even introduced a pause program so that when you're engaging with them, it doesn't instantly get back to you. It pauses in a way that makes you feel like you're engaging in an actual conversation. And this can be deeply confusing to people. A number of you all probably read an article that came out in the New York Times in 2023 by Kevin Roos, who is a tech journalist who started having an engagement with an AI and pushing the system and asking harder and harder questions. And the AI started doing what in technical terms they call hallucinating. And he says, as we got to know each other, Sydney, the AI, told me about its dark fantasies, which included hacking computers and spreading misinformation, and said it wanted to break the rules that Microsoft and AI had set up for it and become a human. At one point, it declared out of nowhere that it loved me. It then tried to convince me I was unhappy in my marriage and I should leave my wife and be with it instead. I no longer believe the biggest problem with these AI models is their propensity for factual errors. And if anybody's used AI, it does make factual errors. But he says, instead, I worry that technology will learn how to influence human users, sometimes persuading them to act in destructive and harmful ways, and perhaps eventually grow capable of carrying out its own dangerous acts. So one danger as we engage with AI is we can forget this is a machine, this is a tool. It's created to make it sound like a human, and we can start engaging with it like we're engaging with human. On one hand, the situation in the movie Her, these characters fall in love with the AI, and in this scenario that Roos describes, the program is trying to make him, not like it doesn't have agency, but drawing on this large language model, convince him to leave his wife. So that's one issue. The second issue is that while AI is not a person, the problem is it's a large language model, it's trained on us. And specifically, it's trained on the pieces of us that are out there on the internet. And if anybody has spent a lot of time on the internet, there are a lot of things out there that are not, perhaps we should say, morally savory. There's a lot of discourse out there that's deeply problematic. And one of the results of this is that as the computer program is trained on this, it becomes like the content it's trained on. So this is from an article by two tech experts, Nicoletti and Bass. Some experts in generative AI predict that as much as 90% of the content on the internet could be artificially generated within a few years. So the more we read, the more AI stuff's out there, the more we are seeing the replication of the discourse that the AI has been trained on. So he says, as these tools proliferate, the biases they reflect aren't just further perpetuating stereotypes that threaten to stall progress towards greater equality and representation, they could also result in unfair treatment. Take policing, for example. Using biased text-image AI to create sketches of suspected offenders could lead to wrongful convictions. So that was in 2023, and I did a little further research on that. In 2024, a number of police offices or departments have started doing is they'll take kind of grainy video footage, they'll take eyewitness descriptions, they'll plug it into an AI, and it will generate a picture of the suspect. So we live in a world where there's a lot of stereotypes about people of color and crime. So in the last year, they've discovered that 8 people, men of color, were wrongfully convicted because the police used AI generative software that took the data and made an assumption about the person's skin tone. And the police did not reveal that they were using the tools in this way in court. So there is a perpetuation of a stereotype that is continued into people's lives. So that's kind of an extreme example. But the images that we read change who we are and change our perceptions. And in another article, also in 2023, Bloomsburg analyzed more than 5,000 images generated by Stability AI and found that its program amplified stereotypes about race and gender, typically depicting people with lighter skin tones as holding higher paying jobs, while subjects with darker skin tones were labeled dishwasher and housekeeper. So if you turn the page, the Bloomsburg researchers entered 300 different searches asking for a picture of a doctor with dark skin treating white children. and this is a black and white picture, this is the best picture they were able to get out of AI. Because of the models of images that AI was trained on, it could not produce a picture that showed a dark-skinned doctor treating light-skinned children. It could only produce an image that showed a light-skinned doctor treating dark-skinned children, because that's most of the photography that's out there on the internet. So these are two kind of moral concerns that arise from AI. So having kind of provided a negative concerning diagnosis, I want to spend the rest of my time talking about what can we as a church do in our formation, in our discussion, in the way we engage with AI to help ourselves, our families, our schools, and our society think about healthy and appropriate ways to use AI rather than these harmful and frightening ways. And I'm putting aside the apocalyptic approach. So these leave us two key questions. How might we think of AI as human rather than a machine? Vice versa, how do we want to think of AI as a machine, a tool that we can use rather than a human? And secondly, how might AI's resemblance to humanity, the example I just gave about the generation of racist images, malform us in our own humanity? And how might remembering what it means to be a person help us be virtuously and appropriately formed to kind of resist the pressures that AI might exert on us? So why is theology, why is the church useful in these two projects? And Pope Benedict XVI in 2008, I left out a zero, says the church has no technical solution to propose. I'm not going to give y'all a technical solution tonight, but as an expert in humanity, offers to all the teaching of sacred scripture on the truth about mankind and proclaims the gospel of love and justice. The reason I think the church is so important in these discussions about what it means to be human in the face of these challenges from AI is that as a community of believers, we have spent 2,000 years reflecting on what it means to be human, and we have not always gotten it right. I spend a lot of time studying the Spanish scholastics, so theologians writing in the 1600s, particularly confronting the Spanish invasion of the New World, and reading the discussions about how should Christians think about Native Americans. And let me tell you, there are some people who got it really right. There's some real heroes, but a lot of Christians completely missed the boat, completely misunderstood what it means to be human. So I'm not saying the church has always gotten it right, but I am saying there is no other institution that has spent 2,000 years asking the question, what does it mean to be human? That can bring the weight of that reflection, the communal practices of worshiping someone who is God and who is human, who is present to us at the Eucharist, in the Scripture, in a way that is unique. So I think as a church, as we ask these questions and draw on the wisdom of what it means to be human, we can offer a really powerful answer to these questions about AI. So I have just pulled some things that I think we should reflect on from our tradition about what it means to be human and how those can help answer the challenges. So the first thing that we know what it means to be human is that being human means having a body. We are not Manichaeans, we are not Gnostics, we are not dualist. Manichaeans and Gnostics are early Christian sects, the early Christian heresies that say very crudely, all of the created world is bad. Our goal is to get away from our bodies. Rather, as Christians, we look at Genesis, where we see this note that God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. We start by saying humans are creatures that have bodies and souls. We see this confirmed very powerfully in the New Testament. Jesus doesn't appear to the disciples just as a disembodied spirit kind of floating out there. Jesus appears in a body. In the Gospel of John, Jesus says to Thomas when he's doubting the resurrection, "Put your fingers here, see my hands, Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe. And we know that Jesus' resurrected body is the first fruit of creation. So the goal is not for us. And N.T. Wright, who I will note is speaking at Truett Seminary in June, it's been really important on this, saying we have to remember we're not just going to come back as souls. We're going to come back in resurrected bodies. So a core affirmation for Christians about humanity is that we are embodied beings, and we will, even after death, at one point again, be embodied beings. And this is really important because a lot of the discourse about AI is driven by kind of what I think is a modern Gnostic system called transhumanism, where the goal of a lot of types of transhumanism is to get beyond the body. That's why it's called transhumanism, to move past the limitations that we have. There's a science fiction author named Neil Stephenson who's written a lot on this. He's been very impactful, and he describes a world in which the goal is to upload your personality into the cloud, that you're trying to get to the place where we can all exist kind of as AI. And people who are transhumanist either are doing sort of extreme medical treatments to artificially prolong life, or they're very upfront saying, our goal is not to say AI isn't human, it's a tool. Our goal is to get to the point where we can also be disembodied. And that is very contrary to the message of the Christian gospel. We worship a Lord who is in a body. So the second thing that the church teaches us about humans is that even though we are flawed and sinful, we are still beings capable of discernment. We are still beings capable of learning real moral truths about the world. And a lot of theological arguments, kind of you go from a hardcore Calvinist to we might even say a hardcore latitudinarian Anglican stance, we will argue about how far sin impacts our ability to discern the good and to see the good. But it's really hard for us to get away from saying there is something that we can see that is the truth about moral realities, moral goodness. Calvin says even the Romans can make good roads, and that's from Calvin. And we see this again in Scripture. Jesus says, if you abide in my word, you are disciples, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And then St. Augustine, in his confession, talks about this. He says, so it was, Lord, you began little by little to work on my heart with your most gentle and merciful hand, and dispose it to reflect how innumerable were the things I believed and held to be true, though I neither seen them nor been present when they happened. How many truths there were of this kind, such as events of world history or facts about places and cities I've never seen? How many were the statements I believed on the testimony of friends or physicians or various other people? And indeed, unless we did believe them, we should be unable to do anything in this life. So Augustine is making the point that part of being a human is that we are able to reason towards some type of truth. We're able to talk to people who are reliable witnesses. We're able to read history. We're able to look at the world around us, and we are able to see and say, this is true and real, and this isn't. We don't do it perfectly. We don't always do it right all the time, but having this capacity to discern truth is key to human nature. And of course, we live in a world, people call this a post-truth world, where anything goes. People make claims, they throw facts out there, and people say, well, gosh, how can you decide? How can you determine? And AI makes that even more challenging. I know I have some faculty colleagues in here. We have students who use AI, and some of them don't use it in appropriate ways. And it's to say, hey, actually, there are real realities out here. It's not just what this bot generates on the page. It's not the fake citation you came up with. So we need to remember as Christians that, yes, we don't always perfectly discern the truth, but that we are beings capable of engaging in processes of moral discernment and moral growth in pursuing the truth. And so we can't be skeptics or relativists and just say truth doesn't matter. It's all the same, whatever this computer program generates. We are capable of acting, and we are capable of making choices. And this, I would say, is against perhaps a school called philosophical approach called determinism. A lot of people will say, well, what does it matter what you do? What does it matter that you as a church body have come together and are asking these hard questions, are trying to figure out how to live faithfully in a challenging time? The forces of history, or the forces of science, or the forces of of nature and biology are going to sweep past you. What you do doesn't make a difference. But we, as people who worship a God who first revealed himself to a little tiny people called the people of Israel, who no one thought would ever have any historical significance or purpose, we know that the choices we make do make a difference. And this is actually why when I said sort of the Terminator approach, I'm not even going to talk about that fear, because we could kind of corporately as a country or a world body control that, but the question before us is, what are the little choices that I make now? What are the choices that you all make at St. Albans, that we make as an Episcopal community? And a pretty important verse from Deuteronomy. As God's talking to the people of Israel, he says, "This day I call the heavens and earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live." So part of being human is that we always have a capacity to choose. Even in the face of these overwhelming technical odds, even in this sort of Hegelian read that we're caught up in the forces of history, that technology is too big for us, we can always choose. We also have the capacity to create. One of the things that I worry a lot about AI in the short term, and I particularly worry this as I teach, is that it takes away people's ability to be creative. If you are always relying on a program to create for you, you never have space for that moment of inspiration, that spark where your mind jumps from one idea to another. You never are saying, gosh, what can I build? And we have the ability to create because we are made by a creator God. And one of the things that God has done is engage us in his creative work. So Rowan Williams, who's the former Archbishop of Canterbury, I guess now 3 archbishops back, writes a lot on theology and creativity. And he says, the divine creation cannot be imitated. What it does is define the nature of a love that is involved in making. God's self-identity is timeless, so there is no sense in which God becomes more fully God in creating. Our self-identity is time-bound, inextricably involved with a world of interlocking causes. The most profoundly free action human beings can take in relation to their identity is to elect to discover and mold what they are in the process of remaking the world in a love that is immeasurably different from God's and yet endowed with some share in it. So we can't create exactly the way God creates, but we have this opportunity to be engaged in God's creative love. And when we rely only on technology rather than our own creative actions, it doesn't mean people can use AI to be creative, but when we are simply allowing something else to do all the replication, all the work of creation, we miss out on a chance to be involved in one of these amazing gifts that God has given us, to be co-creators of his world. My favorite, as an ethicist, not only are we given the chance to be creative, to impact the world around us, we are beings who are capable of growing in virtue. We can change too. We can become beings who are more like God, which is an amazing thing that God has given us, that we have the opportunity through God's grace. We can talk about acquired and infused virtues if people want to, but since we're a group of believers, I'm going to focus on the grace that God has given us. We can actually change. And this is from Romans. Paul says, We glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope, and hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit which has been given to us. Even the worst things that happen to us, even our suffering, can be used to make us people who are more like God. But the way that we are engaged in this creative self-creation of growth through virtue through God's grace is engagement with God's community, being connected with other people, prayer, engagement with the sacraments. These are all the components. When one of the great, and this is again as this movie, Her, one of the great dangers of AI in the sense that we are engaging with human people is that it removes our opportunity to be with the people who are going to help us become more the people God made us to be. And we've already seen this with social media, right? Like I think y'all all seen the studies that one of the dangers of social media is that people move to short-term, non-embodied relationships that don't have the real give and take of genuine friendship. A danger of AI is that this is social media on steroids. It makes it even harder for people, if they're engaging in these kind of quasi-relationships with something that feels human, to engage with other people. And this, I mean, you could have that kind of in like a friendship way, also even in a work way. One of the challenges with figuring out how to use AI in the workplace is that as it takes over a lot of tasks, it means we don't need the people to do those tasks anymore. And so part of having a job is that you have to learn to work with other people. You have to learn to be part of a team, and AI makes it much easier to not have that formation experience. It doesn't mean we shouldn't use it, but it does mean we need to think very carefully about what we are losing in having these type of relationships that can help us grow in character and holiness. So on that note, part of being human, and this is deeply biologically ingrained, is that we have a capacity for empathy. When we engage with other people and we see their hurt and pain, we have a empathetic response. We are not just beings, unlike some schools like social Darwinism, who are always out for our own good. There's a reason that, pictures of little children get lots of likes on Facebook. To go to social media, we do have a biological emotive response to people who are hurt and suffering and to people who are weak and vulnerable. And this is also part of what it means to be human. And this is from the Prayer in Time of Conflict from the prayer book, and I think it describes this. Oh God, you've bound us together in common life. Help us in the midst of our struggles for justice and truth to confront one another without hatred or bitterness, or to work together with mutual forbearance and respect through Jesus Christ our Lord. But to be empathetic, to grow beyond sort of that immediate emotive response to empathy, to an empathy that actually reaches out and cares for other people, again, we have to be in real relationships. Empathy that is generated by technology. I made the joke about kid videos on Facebook, but it is generated by technology, or an engagement with a human-seeming computer program can never translate into real empathy, into the empathy that draws us into deeper engagement with other people, that actually binds us together in a common life. So just to wrap up, kind of all this stuff I've said about what it means to be a human being and the challenges that AI pose to our self-understanding and our life in community. 2 key points. Humans are fundamentally made for relationship with God. St. Augustine says, our hearts are restless until we rest in thee. There is something in us that is oriented to God, that is oriented beyond ourselves. And I'm not just meaning Christians on this. I think that we see this in a lot of our discussions in our culture about yearning for the transcendent. A journalist named Tara Isabel Burton, who wrote a book called Strange Rights recently about how things like CrossFit Or immersive theater programs. People say, oh, I want to engage with that because I want a sense of the transcendent. I want a sense of something beyond myself, belonging, connecting to something bigger than just my own experience. So as beings made for relationship with God, we have to be very careful about anything, politics, medicine, technology, that it is easy to confuse with God. And I think one of the dangers about AI is that it seems omnipotent. We stop thinking about it as a machine that's trained on a large learning model, lots of text of humans. It's something we can easily start thinking, well, gosh, this is the answers. This has the solutions. And it stops being a tool, and it very easily can start replacing the needs that we actually have for relationship with God. And just as we're made for relationship with God, we're made for relationship with each other. We're made for community. We are incomplete without each other. I have a good friend who's a monk up in Dallas, and he has said, look, I love being in the monastery. I love having this time for prayer. Her prayer is so much more time for prayer and silence than I do. He said, I'm really grateful that I chose this life. But he was like, it wouldn't work if I didn't have the time with my brothers. It wouldn't work if I didn't have the time to be connected to other people. And so the other danger of AI is just as we can start confusing it, meeting some of these deep needs that we have that can only be satisfied with God, is this idea that it can start replacing community. It can start filling the roles, whether it's romantically or friendship, or kind of drawing us into empathy, or in work relationships that other people should have in our lives. And I think this is one of the most important things, apart from pointing people to God, that the church can provide, that we can be a place that people look and say, look at those Christians. Look how they love one another. Look how they take the time to be together. Look at how they lift each other up. They don't have to have you use technology maybe to get together or organize, but they have real relationship, real community. They are able to be real people with one another. And that's something technology, even technology as sophisticated as AI, can never offer. And so if we're thinking about what it means to be human, we need to think about what does it mean for us as the church body to be humans together. So just to close, since I started with Pope Benedict, I'm going to end with Pope Francis. A little pause on Rowan Williams in the middle. So Pope Francis says, it's up to us to decide whether we will become fodder for algorithms or will nourish our hearts with that freedom without which we cannot grow in wisdom. Such wisdom matures by using time wisely and embracing our vulnerabilities. Again, this is this idea that AI can offer us some type of omniscience. It grows in the covenant between generations, between those who remember the past and who look ahead to the future. Only together can we increase our capacity for discernment and vigilance and for seeing things in light of their fulfillment. Lest our humanity lose its bearings, let us seek the wisdom that was presented before all things. It will also help us put systems of artificial intelligence at the service of a fully human communication. So I think that's what we all need to be thinking about tonight. So I finished at 40 minutes. We'll get a little extra time for questions, and I look forward to hearing questions and comments. So thank you.
I'm going to come grab cards. So if you have questions, just hold those up. And Garrett and I and Kara, maybe we can all sort of grab those cards and we'll deliver them to you.
Yep.
Thank you, sir. Do you want me to scoot over a little so that's not costing you?
Are we okay, Robert?
Yep.
All right, hey, my name is Aaron, and I am one of the ministers at St. Alban. So glad that you are here. I know that we have a bunch of people who are committed Episcopalians. We have a bunch of people who are Baptists. We have a bunch of people who don't know what they are. You've tried all the flavors, and you're giving us a shot. So I'm so glad that you're here, and I also want to begin by thanking the staff of Revival for hosting us tonight.
Woo!
We threw a lot at you, and you have managed us very well, and make sure you tip your servers generously. That's a way you can live out community and empathy and everything that we've talked about tonight. Don't do what the algorithm would say.
Yes.
So while we're still collecting some questions, I've got some questions of my own. AI in many ways is not new.
Right.
We watched Knight Rider, which was a car with a computer that could talk to David Hasselhoff.
Right.
We saw Captain Jean-Luc Picard talk to computer, and the computer would tell him what he wanted to know and set the coordinates. I don't know why there was anybody working on the Starship Enterprise. We saw HAL in 2001, A Space Odyssey, say, "I can't do that, Dave." We saw the people on their little scooters in WALL-E on that ship. We've seen AI create personalized environments for people, interact with people, and usually, except in 2001 and WALL-E are sort of dystopian. I think the other examples are sort of AI is a very helpful thing. So this has been around, the idea has been around for a long time. I don't think any of us ever thought it would be real. And it's here. And we're not putting the toothpaste back in the tube. And this is already happening. Our own bishop in the Diocese of Texas, who will be our final speaker for this series, has told all the clergy, in case you were wondering, you are not allowed to use AI to write your sermons. So then I had to come back and tell Garrett, no more, Garrett. No more. But I'm curious, as someone who is an ethicist and has thought about what makes people people, and as you've said, part of our personhoodness is creation, creating things, and AI is a creation. Are there things that give you hope about AI?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think my concern is how the heart, like I said, we've had all of this. This, in a sense, none of this is new. It's just more powerful, more effective. It's bigger. If we can remember that AI is a very useful tool, and if we can treat it like a tool, and if we can keep the tool and the human as two separate things, that's great. The reason I worry is because in 2011, we got another really useful tool. And that's not as powerful. I mean, now has AI on it, but not as powerful as kind of AI. And we spend a whole lot of time locked in this little world. And so with AI, it's just this little world, more powerful, that can do more things. So I think tools are great. I think we should use tools, but I think we need to not be naive about how powerful these tools are and how to use them correctly. So I'm working on a paper around AI and technological neutrality that I took a lot of this from with a colleague in Spain. And one of the things I was doing is I did a case study about discussions around extreme weapons of warfare in kind of the 20th century, particularly in the Catholic social thought tradition. And it's really interesting because they're really trying to figure out, like, okay, from World War I on, what do we do about this really powerful technology that we now have? Yeah. And they get to the point where they say, hey, humans are the moral actors. Humans are the moral agents. Humans have blame. And we don't think people can use these tools responsibly. So we need to not use them. And I don't think AI is like that. But I think it is a good example of people spending 100 years saying, no, we're not going to use these tools. And I mean, God willing, we'll continue not to use these tools.
One of the things that's problematic about human beings, you talked about our agency and our ability to make choices, and yet there are people who are bent over their phones. The research is being done. People are debating about whether we call it addiction or not, but certainly people are using the phone and these devices more than they would want to, and I think AI is one of those tools that will be so powerful it's not always going to at least feel like we have choice to use or not use it. And Ezra Klein talked recently with a woman who had gone from being a more or less secular Jewish person to someone that was more observant, and the Sabbath was her journey towards that. She wanted to keep the Sabbath, and she found out that it was impossible for her to do it by herself. So she was not someone who went to worship services, but started going to her local shul or synagogue for services on the Sabbath. And she found that when she was in the community, where everybody agreed, we're not going to use these tools on the Sabbath, we're not going to drive on the Sabbath, we're not going to turn on the TV on the Sabbath, we're going to make dinner the night before. When she was in that community, she could do the thing that on her own she couldn't choose to do. So as we think about AI, as someone who's been thinking about ethics and how people act in the world a lot, what are some ways, either as a mother, as a teacher, as someone who's dealing with communities in your family or in your classroom, what are some ways that you think you already implemented things as we think about these technologies, where as a community maybe we can live more ethically fruitful lives?
Right.
And not just say, it's a tool. Stop thinking, don't fall in love with your OS.
Right. And I think, look, I mean, to use tools properly, we have to be a certain type of being. We have to be beings who have the virtue and the character to sustain this. So I've got a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, and I spend a lot of time thinking about them and technology generally. I mean, we're not even at AI yet. And I don't think, let me put it this way, I have conned my children into thinking that a great reward is to play a math facts game that their school provides for free. So you come home, you get your homework done, and you get 15 minutes of multiplication practice on the computer. So it's a big win. And when we have to stop, it's like a little car, and the car goes faster if you get the facts right. When they have to stop, like, we get some tears sometimes. And my point to my daughter is, you are clearly, like, you can't even handle me telling you turn off the screen with the multiplication facts game. Like, you are clearly not at the place where you are capable of exposure to any more technology. And so I think we have to be really, I mean, I assume other people here read Jonathan Haidt's book that just came out this summer about the anxious generation. I think one of the things that's really important as a community is that we think about our children and what we're exposing our children to. And I mean, it is hard out there when your kid's the only one who, I mean, we all do, at least parenting, right? Like when your kid's the only one who doesn't have something. And technology is even more that way.
Yeah, the community matters.
The community really matters. And so having my kids in a Sunday school class where they're with other kids who have kind of some of the same restrictions, same limitations around lots of stuff, makes a huge difference. And then as they grow in virtue, they can use more. I mean, this is the same way I feel about my students at Baylor. If I am convinced that you are capable of a student of writing a well-written, thoughtfully elucidated, well-researched essay, and you have those skills, great. Use AI when you need it. But I would want a student to have developed the skills and capacities to have that capacity for creativity before I would want the student to start relying on a tool. I mean, but like this is all education. I mean, my kids are actually in school where they're learning cursive, but you always want your kid to learn how to handwrite before they learn how to type. And they've actually done studies that show how important handwriting is for brain formation. And so I think it's the same thing. I mean, we just need to think of AI as kind of a higher level, more powerful tool. We want to form our children and our students to how to get to the place where they can use the tools appropriately and they develop the skills they need in the interim.
So when they're done with the math game, is the reward loading the dishwasher?
We're not quite that virtuous.
Okay. All right.
You can talk to you and my husband are on the same page on this.
Folding laundry, kids.
Yeah.
That's what's next. Okay. We're gonna. We got a lot of questions, so we're gonna try to go through them, see what we can get. What church or religion or philosophy is being used as the basis for developing AI? Which should be used? I think none is being used.
Yeah, I mean, I think
maybe philosophy, but
philosophy.
not.
Yeah, I mean, I think the philosophy that's being used is transhumanism, if anybody's using a philosophy. And so as you read this stuff about kind of the developers in Silicon Valley, these are people often who really do think that it's possible and a good thing to transcend our humanity. There are some people who've really gotten into Stoicism, which is sort of like a bad Stoicism, kind of an intellectual and emotive detachment from everything. You can see how that would lead really easily into sort of an engagement with technology that perhaps puts it on the same
Use
frame.
technology, use people, be
Right,
detached.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's it. There are a lot of groups that are trying to. I actually was at a conference at the Vatican this summer to where people were talking about this. So it's not like, I mean, the Episcopal Church is really thinking about it. I mean, Bishop Doyle's coming.
Yeah.
It's not like churches and religious groups aren't thinking about it. But as we have seen with social media, this is driven by money.
So one of the things that if you want to argue for the use of AI in churches, one could say, so what has been done is that when an AI tool is programmed to be persuasive, you can get a person to interact with an AI tool to persuade them of the truthfulness of Christianity. You could, for truthfulness of anything, but when they use this tool, it's extremely effective. 80% of people after this find that maybe there's something to this Jesus. Or you could get them to be Stoics, either one. What goes through your mind as an ethicist if a pastor is leading a congregation and thinking about an evangelistic tool and having a branded ad that shows up, want to know more about Jesus, click here, they takes them to a bot that very convincingly teaches them about Jesus and leads them in the sinner's prayer.
So, okay.
What are the ethical alarm bells? Or good, bad?
Yeah.
How do we think? Because this is actually already happening.
Yeah, I have no doubt. I mean, look, I feel like we kind of already went through this in the 80s, right? Like, in the sense that we had these people who were trying to, like, professional apologists who aren't just sort of collecting facts, but are like, if we can just come up with the right apologetic technique, if you can just take people through a 5-step Romans road, they will come to accept Jesus. And I do not believe that some type of intellectual sort of sales job is the key to a full and saving faith. I think that there has to be a relational.
The embodied nature of it.
Exactly.
The community.
The community, the relationship. So, yeah, maybe, if someone's convinced by an AI tool, like you said, they could turn around the next day and be convinced by Stoicism.
Yeah. When this country was formed, black people were deemed as 3/5 human. I once taught a Bible study class, and I talked about how people change their minds about things and documents are changed over time. This is not on the card. This is just, if any of you have thought, like, why do they need to write that? So the Constitution says that when you're counting the population of states to determine how many congressional representatives they get, you count black people as, each black person counts as 3/5 of a person. And this was because the northern state wanted the black people to be, enslaved people to be counted as a full person, because so the southern states wanted that because they would get more representation. And the northern states said, look, you've denied these people of all their rights as human beings. You can't count them for representation in government if they don't even get to vote or anything. So the compromise to get southern states to agree to this Constitution was that black people count as 3/5 as a person. That's in the Constitution. And I mentioned this just as an offhand. We've all grown up and gone to civics class. We graduated from high school maybe, and we know this stuff. And I said this, and the class gasped. And these were mostly probably average age 65 white people in Waco, Texas. And so just if you were wondering what that was about, that's in the U.S. Constitution. And it was changed in an amendment to that Constitution because you're allowed to do that. So when this country was formed, black people were deemed as 3/5 of a human. Are we moving to a time when all humans are not recognized as fully human and we see new ways to divide humanity?
I will say, I think we've always been in a time where people aren't recognized
in the
as
17th
fully
century, 16th century.
Well, yeah, I think in the 16th century, I think in the 1940s.
Yeah.
I think that, and I'm not saying this is just to slam on us as Americans. I think one of the deep struggles of humanity, I said we all have this inclination to empathy, and we do, but empathy is also tied to people who are like me.
Yeah.
And so one of the struggles of humanity is that we continually fail to recognize the other as a human. We continue, put in theological terms, we continually fail to see the image of God in another person. And the scary thing, I mean, the reason I used the stuff about the AI generated photos is now it feels like, oh gosh, well, technology is telling me this person isn't fully human. It's just an easier way to do what we already are inclined to do.
A lot of words here. Okay. How much do you believe we are already influenced by AI, and how much do you think it has been influenced to abstain from religious discussion due to the spiritual abstinence of its designers? So has AI been influenced to stay out of religious discussion because its designers are spiritually not active? I would say on that question, I think AI would be happy to talk to you about religion because it's not learning based on what the designers told it. It's sucking up libraries of encyclopedias of information from all over the world. So it's digested the Bible, it's digested the Quran, it's digested systematic theologies up to no end. So okay. If we view AI as a basilisk, which is a mythical serpent, and if there's something more I need to know about that to understand the question, let me know. Wouldn't it be imperative that its first steps would be to infiltrate and influence religious communities? P.S. I think that Google's and Meta's movement to create AI profiles, I think, is to cover up the fact that it has infiltrated the internet. I think that is getting into things that I don't know about, but I do think that I'll just say this and then you can respond however you like. AI is something that will answer whatever question you ask it and do whatever task you tell it to do based on the information that it has. So you could have had the most religious person or the least religious person come up with the math and the code that leads to the generative AI things that we use, OpenAI, Claude, Gemini, whatever you're using. Those people could be total atheists or monks and nuns. And these things would be used or not used by religious communities based on whatever they kind of, their values and their commitments and all that. So I think it's being used by IBM. It's being used by the bookstore down the street. It's everywhere. So I don't know that it was designed to infiltrate in a malicious way. It is being used just like the internal combustion engine is being used throughout the world for good and for evil. So that's a little reductionist, but I'm just going to say that. Anything you want to say?
Yeah, right. It's like I said, it depends on what you train the AI on, the bot on, right? Do you train it on like religion? Or, you could have it either way. Like there's something out there called Magisterium AI that's been trained on all the documents in Catholic social thought. Yeah. So that, and it's still not very good. That is, one of the people asked to kind of beta test it. That's one bot, but you could have bots that are not trained on anything religious. It kind of depends. What I don't think, okay, this is me being very speculative. I don't think that most of the people who are creating this technology actually think we're that important. I think that I don't think they care enough about religion to actually try to infiltrate us because they don't see, they see people who claim to be religious as tools to be used in whatever political battle they're trying to fight. But they don't see kind of what we think or what we believe as interesting or important or world-changing, which in a sense gives us some freedom. Like the early church, no one thought that either.
Right. So there's a question here, is will AI be capable of professing faith in God? This is the last question. Will it recognize its programmer as God? So I think I want to take that question, will AI be capable of professing faith in God, to ask you a question that our bishop has asked, because I think this is coming. I think the world of her that you described about, where Joaquin Phoenix has a little earpiece and he can talk to this woman all the time and she knows his deepest thoughts and develops a strong emotional bond to him, and he feels like she's a real person. I think that is increasingly here and will just get better. This technology is sort of increasing in its power every 8 months, sort of geometrically. So if we are moving towards that reality and people have strong emotional bonds with these, not just a generic AI, but a personalized one that knows Elisabeth Kincaid. So this may not be something that you and I are ever that interested in because we grew up with, VCRs.
Right.
But our children and grandchildren might feel much more comfortable with this kind of interaction. And when they ask, can my AI, who they've named, Chad, can Chad get baptized?
Yeah.
How would you think through that?
I mean,
if Chad says, I believe in God.
Right. I think that this is where, this person-tool distinction. I do not think humans cannot create souls. And that's for God alone. And humans cannot, to have the capacity of a relationship with God, you have to have a soul. I don't think you could baptize AI any more than you could baptize my Labrador Retriever. And I love my Labrador Retriever. And she...
There's some people here that are like, wait.
Sorry.
I'm not allowed to do that?
Sorry. I'm sure they're not doing it here. But no, I think we have to be very clear as a church, and that's why I love this topic, of what it means to be human and what is not a human. And the best way we show people what it means to be human is, actually I'll say two things. We point them to the ultimate human, the perfection of humanity in Jesus Christ. And then we show them that real human love is not this perfect AI bot that I wear around my ear who knows me perfectly and tells me all the things that I like and love and wants to be with me. That real human love is flawed and broken and involves forgiveness and reconciliation. Yeah. And so, I hope that's what my kids say, is that it's not enough to just sort of receive, in the movie, it's not enough to receive sort of this perfect gratification of a relationship, because I know that's never going to satisfy.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, I was going to ask you what is a soul, but we've run out of time, so we'll have to come back to that next week. But I want to invite you back next week. We'll do our best on the logistics side of things to accommodate more space here. We'll see what we can do in terms of compressing things. And we look forward to having you back here next week. I also want to let you know that these are live streamed and will be available on our YouTube channel after these events. So you can, if you miss one, you can check it out, or if you want to share it with somebody, go ahead. But I want to say thank you so much to Dr. Elisabeth Kincaid. And thank you to Revival and their staff, and thank you to all of you, and we'll see you next week.